Hi, we're back at the Roundhouse, and we're going to have a pretty good look at most of the American Flyer Gilbert locomotives. We're going to start with their Northern 484. Now, this locomotive had a rather long wheelbase, which meant that it did better on the straights than it did on the corners. And it was rather unforgiving on uneven tracks. But it was heavy and it was strong and it did pull like the proverbial freight train. Detailing it was quite good. Now, the most memorable locomotive that American Flyer produced was probably this one. Their New York Central 464 Hudson type locomotive. It was a heavy locomotive with a good strong motor in it and could pull a good long train for you. Anyone who got one of these was always pleased. Now, arguably, the best series of locomotives that Gilbert built were their Pacifics, of which they made a total of 4. And there were no less than 4 different tenders, 2 different chassis. They could be available in metal or plastic. The sole example that didn't get the smoke unit was the streamliner, and it could have had a better paint job to make it a little bit more appealing. Pacifics like this were a good part of the success. Nicely designed, the K5. Only problem with it was the boiler front was not secured in a very secure manner. It was simply held in place by springs attached to the boiler in a press fit. So that was the only part on this one. Now, the workhorse for Flyer would have been the Atlantic. It was what came in your starter sets, and it was probably the first loco that most kids got. It came as a basic unit with possibly a slide-on reverse switch in the cab. It came in plastic or metal. It came with different linkages. It came with and without smoke. It even came with, at times, without a headlight. All those things produced incremental cost differences for getting someone started in railroading. But it came at a cost in that when you took out things like the smoke unit out of the front, the unit became imbalanced, tail heavy, and it would actually lift the front bogies off the ground. Now, another icon for American Flyer by Gilbert was the American type locomotive that they called the Franklin. Now, the American type or Franklin locomotive from Gilbert was quite dependable, and it shared only a few features with the other locomotives. It did not utilize the same motor. Tender trucks are the same, and drivers are the same, linkages are the same, and pilot bogies could be used. But virtually everything is brand new plastic that actually seems to have survived the wear and tear of young folk. The only problem with it was that it was not in scale to the rest of the line. It is slightly larger than it should be in scale terms. If you're not going to use the 5-fingered switcher, you need an actual one. And American Flyer came up with a pretty good one in the form of their 080. Their yard pig was a pretty good rendition of an 080 yard switcher. They usually came with the nickel plate logo on them, but that was overwhelmed by the name American Flyer on the tender. The only deficiency that this unit probably had was that it could have stood an extra pickup contact on its trucks, as the later 060 did, which meant that going over points, it was always in electrical contact. But otherwise, a very good steamer. Now, to complement the 080 switcher, they produced this 060, which is a very nice rendition. It's strictly plastic, which meant that some little pieces don't fare as well as others, but it's an excellent smoking unit. It had choo-choo sound like the large ones, larger brethrens. It shared drivers with the 080, and had a very good motor on it, good pulling ability. Now, one of the last locomotives that I have here is the Docksider. I believe this particular one was picked up somewhere between 1964 and 66 for all of $6.95. And even at that price point, I don't think it was worth it. This was the bare bones model where it had one direction only. It had a faux coupler in the front. It had a fixed coupler in the back. And if I recall correctly, instead of the normal track pickups that are on it at the moment. It had something that looked reminiscent of slot cars with this braided wire down to touch the tracks. That might have just been our desperation at trying to make the thing work. I don't know for sure. Styling, it looked fine, but running wise, the motor was a nightmare. Piece of junk as far as I'm concerned. I dearly hope that the Lionel version is using a CAN motor, which would probably be far more dependable. Okay, and the last locomotive. Okay, now that we've finished steam, we'll move on to non-steam locomotives. Now, one of their premier units were PAs. I'm substituting the Lionel remake here, and I'm grateful for them for making this product. The PAs are sleek. They have a very nice look to them. They were offered in single motor units and double motor units, and dummies came equipped with horns and other gimmicks. They were an excellent unit with lots of pulling power, and that's what was needed at the time. The only regret that I ever had about the PAs from Gilbert was they never produced them in the Delaware and Hudson colors, which were truly attractive, not to take away from Santa Fe at all. Next locomotive that we will look at is the Jeep. These units were so dependable, they were actually boring. They'd run for hours. The body shells were very nicely detailed, and it truly shows when you strip off the paint of any of these units. One problem with these locomotives that doesn't quite make them look right is their oversized trucks. They are taken directly from the PAs. They're made to look like two-wheel bogies, but well, the PAs are actually three-wheel bogies to look at and are actually twos. But they're oversized to the point that the fuel tanks are actually shortened on the body to fill in the space. Just doesn't quite look right. One other flaw in detailing was that they were at risk to melt the light. The light bulbs were prone to melting the body shell from being bent over from time to time. And in speaking of detail, they took some liberties just to get costs down. What would it have taken to add a simple brake wheel, which they did not do on theirs? Is the New Haven Electric. But it's an ambiguous locomotive. I'm presenting this one, which is again a reproduction by Lionel from the original. What type of locomotive is it really? I don't know, but it's a prototype, I guess. Detailing on The Lionel one is quite nice with extending catenaries. I don't know if the original did or not. But yeah, this one runs like a top. And I see no reason for the original not to have, because again, it looked like it was using the same trucks from the PA. Okay, and this one is a little oddity from the American Flyer. It's the Baldwin. The body is nice, chassis is crap. As you can see, there are no guardrails of any sort on this unit. That's how they came. And it's an entirely different motor than any other diesel or electric that they produced. It's all of some very inexpensive style and extremely noisy. I've switched all my Locos to DC operation, and with the AC rotator that came on these, this Loco must have been a nightmare. Now in the background you can see I've placed another Baldwin, but this one has had railings added to it, and it does make a good impression that way. But I understand why the manufacturer didn't do it, because it's a horrendous nightmare to create those small handrails that just would get knocked off in the hands of children pretty quick. Now, there were two other locomotives that AC Gilbert manufactured that aren't featured in this review, and that was the Pike Masters series, where it featured two rather toy-like locomotives, the Casey Jones and the EMD F9. I don't possess them, and having seen them, I just never chose to buy either of them because they're very toy-like appearance. The compromise is made. An example, in the F9, too much of the body is cut out so that the trucks could actually make it around the tight radius Pike Master curves. But all in all, in the 20 years that Gilbert made American Flyer, they did produce some very good models featuring a wide selection of what was available. They made incremental changes on each through the years, but there's a lot of us who are still running that same equipment all these years later. And so Gilbert may be gone, but there's other manufacturers making stuff, and there's so much equipment out there, you can always turn it into something else that's reminiscent of a road that you do like. So have a good time enjoying your railroading.